when we started talking about it.
This is something that happened at the high school, and I'll just talk while explaining. Sorry.
Oops.
This is from an English class, and I believe these were juniors, and they were studying the poem The Raven. And they had been begging their teacher for a project. And she said, okay, I'll give you a project, and we will take a poem, which is linguistic, obviously, and we will make some models to model the scenes out of that poem. And not only did they have to make models, but they had to explain to the rest of the group why they placed every single item in their model, and they had to link it back to the symbolism of the poem. So it was more than just, oh, let's make a cutesy little thing and put it on the table and see how cute it is. And what they did is they were given specific stanzas of the poem, and so they would put the stanzas in chronological order from the poem, and they would literally have a visual representation of the entire poem when they were all finished. And then every group said, you know, here's our stanza, and they would read it aloud and describe how their items ended up in there, and then keep going. And eventually it was a physical model of the entire poem, and they could link it back to their symbolism.
And I think one of the interesting things, again, is at high school, it's a pretty typical traditional high school where this kind of thing wasn't necessarily an expectation or something you would see that often. And when we started teaching the cooperative learning pieces to the middle school and high school, their biggest concern was, well, how do we give points? How do we grade for that? How do we get the kids to do it? And if you're a high school student, how do you not want to do this instead of sit and listen? You know, I think they're getting over the idea that everything has to be for some kind of extrinsic point reward system, and that this is more engaging than some of the other methods that have been going on. So some of those kinds of issues kind of disappeared as we started implementing the strategies. I had Heidi's here. She trains our high school on their high yield strategies, and we had a teacher come to us after some of this training, high school teacher, and say, I just never realized if I took the time it takes to do this strategy in my class, what an impact that has on kids I never thought I was getting to, and I've got to do more of that. And so those kinds of anecdotal pieces are kind of inspiring us to keep going forward when it's not always easy, but they kind of inspire each other. And the high school overall has been kind of the last building to get into this kind of stuff, but it's really kind of nice to see that they're talking about it. Their building team meetings are talking about these things. Their staff meetings, they're all kind of focused on the same thing. And it's a great change in conversation in the building. And there's some of their models right there.
Yes. Assessments and practical that down.
As an art teacher, I really liked having the goals spelled out for our district, because if you give me a goal, then I know where to go with it. And I didn't face the resilience on my department's end that maybe some of the other people did. We were really excited because this unified us, the specialists, with some of the core curriculum teachers, and how can we do our part, and there was that accountability that will help in any way that we can. So my bulletin boards as an art teacher took a different turn. It wasn't just, let's make our product and display it and show what we're doing in art, but how are we using these high yield strategies in our classroom as well? So you'll see that there's an art one on the left, and that was just comparing and contrasting. It used George Rodriguez, an artist, how are cats and dogs alike and different, and then there was a music foldable on the right there. And then on the next slide, this was sort of a little bit of a test, I thought. We're teaching our students these strategies, but now can they be student-driven, and can they actually use them on their own? So what I did was I drew a huge Venn diagram and placed two pieces of art up there and wrote instructions on the side. As you're eating lunch, what do you see that's the same about these two pieces of art? What do you see that's different? Follow the steps, raise your hand, ask the lunch monitor to go get a marker, write your idea up. So how can we really use every space in the building so that bulletin boards are not just to show something pretty? How can we use every moment of the day? When you're at lunch, can you sit and discuss this bulletin board with your friends and maybe talk about these two pieces of art? So it started happening and worked well for us.
Well, this one.
The next couple slides, I think we've kind of hammered
hammered home the idea that our bulletin boards are instructional, so everything in the hallway you will see is either a process of that instruction or is student interactive, and you can see that from the little lady. This was kindergarten. That was a kindergarten project, bug addition.
Oh, this was one of the ones that metaphors are harder for the children to grasp. So this was a bulletin board that I put in the library by where they would line up, and while they were waiting for the teacher, they could read the metaphor, and then there was a candy bar that kind of related to the metaphor. The one was about a little boy was a fountain of laughter, and the answer would be Snickers. And it kind of went along with the candy bars, got them interested, and then they would read it, think about it, and try to figure out which one it was. So just another interactive one.
So in the beginning, the push was similarities and differences. One of the things that we did were analogies of the day in the elementaries, which I have lists for you. And we continued that even this year, and it is absolutely amazing how the students have begun to respond by writing analogies back to me. In fact, the first grade class really stumped me last year. I wish I could remember the whole analogy.
I was thinking about it last night.
Okay.
And it was panther is to cat as nudibranch is to
Blank.
because it was again during our ocean unit, and I had a student whose father was an oceanographer or something, and we didn't know what a nudibranch was. That was our whole day was spent on figuring that out. So she sent that to Mrs. Swag.
It was great.
But the neat thing about that is when Pam announced that as the morning analogy, all throughout the day, students in every grade level were trying to figure out what's a nudibranch. And we're getting online, and teachers were looking at YouTube videos on nudibranchs, and they found out it was a sea slug, and that there's over 1,000 different types of them, and so it became this school-wide thing. Did you see the nudibranch YouTube slide? Yeah, I saw the nudibranch thing. So it was, and my class did research projects done on different types of nudibranchs from that, which I had no idea what they were doing with that. So
And you know, then the fifth graders in my building were, of course, a first grader said nudibranch. We've got to come up with something better than that. So it sparked the whole drive there. But you can see from the list that's coming around, there are times when I will say in the morning announcement, I'll give the analogy, and I always leave one of the spots out. And then the next morning we announce what we left out. So you can leave out the one you think is most appropriate for your students. For example, hot is to cold, as wet is to blank. And I'll tell them, now once you find that answer to that analogy, you've had to figure out the relationship between those words. I want you for the rest of the week to send me analogies that have that same word relationship that I can announce for the students. And every time I get several analogies from students that will fit that same relationship. So they are getting it. And it's so exciting in the morning when I announce the answer from the day before, and I'll leave that little pause, and I'll hear all these kids yelling from the hallway the answer. It's just great. So they are really starting to understand that concept of analogies.
Another strategy was setting objectives, and this is just an example of a teacher who's hung these in the hallway for the objectives that they were working on, but every teacher now will write on their whiteboard or have printed out the objective for the lessons for the day. And we really see that when we do our walkthroughs. As we go through, we have to be able to say, do we know what they're teaching today? And we need to say to the student, what are you learning today? And they'll tell us almost word for word what the objective is that the teacher has put there. It's really created a more focused kind of instruction, and teachers are more cognizant of exactly the content standards that they're trying to get across in that particular day. It really provided some support for the teachers, just being on the same level, and we're doing some vertical teaming and help them understanding what's going on at the different grade levels. So this is just an example.
This is an example of, this was teacher-led professional development, and it was done after school on teacher's own time. Our principal went out and bought all of the materials necessary for it, and everyone just showed up, volunteer basis, completed the posters, took them back to their rooms, and then we took posters and brought it back to our BLT brought it back to the DLT, to then share with the district. So then the posters are kind of sprinkled throughout the district so that kids see it as they go through the buildings.
This is another example of a teacher implementing more of sharing with other teachers. And when we were learning all these different strategies from Marzano, we didn't want to learn the next one and forget what we already had been doing. So this was a poster that we made in DLT, focusing on similarities and differences. It's hanging up over here also. And our principal actually made copies for each teacher to put in their room. So it's just a way to remind students and teachers about the strategy that we already began. And this is another example of a bulletin board. However, this one is in our teacher's lounge. So this was another way besides department meetings for teachers to share what they were doing in our classroom. So this is posted in our teacher's lounge, and whenever a teacher does something with similarities and differences, we post it in the lounge to share with other teachers. And this is another example, something that came straight out of a department meeting. In the past, we saw that department meetings became more of housekeeping items. And now, after we've done the BLT and DLT process, there's a lot more uniformity to our department meetings, and they're focused more on learning and teaching than the household items. We all get a printout of what we'll be talking about before we go to the meeting. So if we have questions, we can think about that before. So we're using our time more efficiently. And what we did with the language arts department meeting was we wanted to have a school-wide vocab focus on high-frequency words that you would see on the OAA. So the language arts teachers went through and picked 9 different words that we wanted the whole school to embrace. And we called them witness words. And our first one was evaluate. So we would make bright, colorful posters of the definition, examples, and we hung them all over our school and in the hallways and on our doors in our classrooms. And then another thing, we really saw all the teachers embracing it and trying to use that word as much as they could in their classroom. We have morning announcements, video morning announcements. The kids in that class were making skits of the witness word being used. And then on the end of the week, on Friday, we would have a quiz the whole school would take from the announcements with 3 questions focused on that witness word. And we would have drawings, and whoever got it right would come down and get candy. And what we've noticed now is for next year, what we'd like to do is implement it at the beginning of the school year and have all departments add words that they would like to see. So we're going to be doing that next year throughout the entire year.
This isn't going to be an example of a language arts department meeting. The most important thing about this is that in the past, special education intervention specialists have not been included in these meetings. We've had our own department meetings. We've always been pulled out of waiver days. It was kind of teacher-driven. We decided that it was important for us to go to these meetings, so we make it a point to attend at least one either language arts or math department meeting in our building every month on top of our own. And we were shocked at how much information we weren't exposed to or weren't even aware of that they discuss at those meetings. They're just very different than special ed meetings. During this time when the witness word was developed, we were there. So then we each took a witness word also. This is an example of talking about the witness word with an intervention specialist and also take note of the roles. We now have roles at meetings. Someone's a recorder, someone's a timekeeper.
We definitely want to do that next year. I think it's amazing. But we definitely need every single department, and we need to start from the beginning of the year. And I think don't you think? Yes.
Yeah, it's sort of unfair to start out. It was sort of, okay, what's that word over there? And the meaning behind it maybe wasn't projected as well from the beginning. And then once they got into it, even my class got into it. And it started to be quiet during the announcements.
He's the intervention specialist.
So, put a value on like that, and they buy into it.
I think so too. I mean, it was like